Russ Laraway, you are a legend. And I'm not the only one who is saying this, right? Like I have been doing a bunch of research as we were, preparing for this conversation, and I saw it multiple times. Russ Laraway, Silicon Valley, legend and an expert. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Jorge? It's really fun and cool to reconnect. It's been a while, yeah, but I'm so glad we're here doing this.
Absolutely. And you have done so many things since we worked together at Twitter. Maybe we can touch on just kind of quickly some of those things and how you've gotten to this point where you've been writing these incredible books.
Yeah, well, just the one book. But I left Twitter and I went and joined Kim Scott at Radical Candor. Our company was actually called Candor Inc. And I helped get that book launched, but a lot of people sometimes call me co-author. I wasn't the co-author. I'm in there a bunch. I think I'm tied with Sheryl Sandberg for the most mentions, so I'll take that. But yeah, so big believer in that. Actually, that time really massively shaped my interest in writing my book. And I can get into that if you like. Did that for a couple years for a whole bunch of reasons. I just felt like I wasn't quite done operating. A really cool opportunity opened up out here in Utah. Qualtrics, co-founder of Qualtrics, old buddy of mine from Google. Actually, both of us had reported to Kim Scott. His name is Jared Smith. Wonderful guy. He and his brother were sort of like two in a box leadership at Qualtrics. And he said, "Yo, I need you to come fix my managers." I was like, "Let's go!" And so came out, started working on that problem. So fun. Turned that into becoming the chief people officer at Qualtrics. We got bought, then we did an IPO, and then I don't know what they're doing now, but yes, that's kind of the path. And then just as I was leaving Qualtrics, this book launched, When They Win, You Win. Really, seems really valuable to people. It's like well rated on Goodreads and Amazon and stuff like that. So it seems to scratch an itch. But yeah, and so that's kind of the path I've taken since Twitter.
I think that, and I've been diving into the book now for a little bit, and it's just so human. And I think it expresses outside of the strategies and frameworks that you kind of lay out. I think like as employees and as managers, we all feel that there is something missing here, and no matter how much we pound the table as an employee. I mean, how many times do you talk to people on a consistent basis and they're like, "Oh, I hate my manager." It's like, no, do all managers like are suck, and like are they inherently just terrible, or like what is going on? Like because people I think largely care. Maybe I'm being naive. So, just in terms of like the idea that it resonates, I just think it touches on so many things, and you just speak you're just like this very practical language, right? So, at least that's what I've been gathering. And I gotta say that your team loved you. I sort of said this in the green room here, but I'll say it for the folks. Like I worked kind of like around the corner from your area on that floor at Twitter when you were running that team. And I just remember, again, everyone loved you. You could see how you motivated and inspired people in ways that, and I don't want to down talk anyone else, but I just had never seen anyone do what you did at Twitter at a high level. How do you sort of like fix this issue, which one of the ways that you've articulated kind of some of these core concepts is that people, they just want to do great work and be totally psyched about doing it, and somehow the world is kind of conspired to confuse the average manager, and we don't create these environments. Like why is this happening, and how can we sort of fix it?
Yeah. So I wrote this book specifically because I think people deserve to be led well. And there is a lot of evidence that shows they're not. And in fact, what's most fascinating about this gigantic body of evidence is that it doesn't even appear managers have gotten better in the last 30 years. And I say that, and that's sort of a measurable idea that, you can go to Gallup and learn about this in painstaking detail. But simple fact is managers haven't improved in 30 years. And a normal person might say to themselves, how the heck can that be? Because I can't walk 10 feet down the street without tripping over a new book or article or podcast aiming to help managers be better. And that corpus of information has been growing over the last 3 years. So how is it managers aren't getting better? So we have this weird sort of quagmire that we have more and more resources than ever to help managers, and yet managers themselves are not improving. Why is that? Well, I think there's a few reasons. I do think you have this small bucket of managers who don't care at all. I just read a Business Insider article this morning about this trend toward people taking their beef with their manager public to LinkedIn often after they leave the company. And the examples that they started with were like a manager at a law firm who threw a case file at a young lawyer and said something flippant to her. I know these managers exist. Unbelievably, they exist. I don't think they're the majority. Whether people care or not, that's a really interesting question. And I know you have something potentially coming in the interview about that. I'm going to push that aside. How do you care? What does that look like? What does it sound like? But here's the reality. I have a little fantasy for you, if you don't mind, Jorge. It's G-rated fantasy.
No, let's do it.
Yeah, but the fantasy is I get to sit down with a bunch of the people who write about this stuff, how to be a better manager stuff, and I get to ask them whatever question I want. And I'm going to ask them all one question for sure, the same question, which is, how do you think your stuff uniquely contributes? And they'll say some cool things, What I imagine they might all think is, oh, well, for the typical manager trying to learn how to be a better manager, imagine them walking through a buffet style lunch line, right? And they're going through and they got their tray and they take a little off the Simon section, a little off the Liz section, a little off the Kim section, perhaps, a little off the Adam section, whatever. And, now they've got this, in the minds of these authors, a nutritious meal that they've pulled custom off, the things they need off that lunch line. And off they go. And of course, that nutritious meal is just a metaphor for a new leadership toolkit. They have to be a great manager. That's what I think all these people would say. That's how my stuff contributes. Here's the problem. To the average manager in the world, could not possibly, this landscape of stuff to help you be a better manager, it does not feel like an orderly trip through a cafe or buffet style lunch line. What it feels like is you're hogtied in the center of a middle school cafeteria while there's a multi-thousand person food fight transpiring. We got broccoli bouncing off your head, mashed potatoes sliding down your glasses. It's terrible, right? Because there's way too much stuff. It does not hang together. And most important, way more important than those first two things I said, none of the advice being given is held to measurable account. So I promise you, if I hadn't had a chance to measure the degree to which the behaviors that I prescribe in the book, but they measurably and predictably lead to more engaged employees, so happier employees at work, and better measurable business outcomes, things like quota attainment. Like I'm not talking about some voodoo. I'm talking about quota attainment. I'm talking about contract renewal rate. I'm talking about lines of code checked in. We were able to measure over 4 years that these behaviors that I've set forth in the book measurably, predictably lead to more engaged employees and better business outcomes. And so that's the book I ultimately wrote. It's given that idea, the research we did is given a little treatment in part one. And most of the book is about here's the way to do these behaviors that matter so much. So yeah, I think most managers are just real confused. The body of evidence tells us they are not getting better despite the mountain of evidence, despite new articles on HBR every day. Despite the new stuff McKinsey pushes out, despite, they're just stagnant. And it's because there's too much stuff. It doesn't hang together. But way more importantly is no one has dared to measure the extent to which specific leadership behaviors measurably and predictably lead to happier employees and better business outcomes.
Do you think that part of this problem, and I know in the book you sort of alluded to this, but I just wanted to speak to it a little bit, that we sort of think that these metrics or these activities or these trainings are like woo-woo, and you sort of mentioned this idea that it actually impacts numbers, right? It impacts revenue. This is not some like survey that's done in a silo and then you can sit there with the HR person and go, oh, okay, cool, everyone's happy. Now let's get to the important stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like how do we sort of wrap our heads around this so we can truly embody this, because the other thing, and before you answer that, the other thing I wanted to say, and I know again you sort of alluded to this in the book, is the idea is that like there's also like this middle manager level, right? Where they're kind of stuck in this world where they are getting a lot of the bad rap, I think, from ICs, and these C-level folks are like, oh, that ain't me, right? That's the middle manager. That's someone else's problem, right? That's not what we're doing. We got to focus on strategic things, right? And
Yeah.
completely missing the mark.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to take you back a step. So there's a very famous, I don't know if it's an article or book or whatever, but it's called The Theory of the Firm. It's an old economics idea called The Theory of the Firm. I actually I posted this on LinkedIn a bit back. I wrote something called The Theory of the Firm, but from a leadership perspective. And it's really important in answering your question. The second part of your question. The first part about, is engagement really important? Is another really good question we can come back to. Theory of the Firm is this. Every result of a company is delivered by its individual contributors, its employees, not its managers, not the senior leadership. The actual results are nothing more, nothing less than the accumulation or sum of all the people out there doing the real work. So that's really important foundation. Then the job of the manager at any level in the organization, by the way. So second part of the Theory of the Firm is, what is the manager's job? The manager's job is to create circumstances under which people can do their best work. A manager will either create or destroy those circumstances. There is no middle ground. Many managers are accidentally destroying them. In fact, many managers who think otherwise are literally destroying them. They're unconscious often. Okay. So that's the manager's job. What's interesting between these two populations, the employees who do the real work of the company, who deliver every result, and the people who lead them, is that 80% of those employees will usually report to a green or relatively inexperienced manager. It's just the way the hierarchy of a company works. And so then the third entity in this Theory of the Firm is senior management. What is their job? Well, they have two jobs. Their first job is to be a technically and tactically proficient direct manager to their reports and insist those people do the same. Your job is not to manage the company. Your job is to manage your directs and insist they manage their directs, and through that you manage the company. It's not broadcast leadership. It's direct. It's like direct leadership. But the second thing they have to do, given this Theory of the Firm, is they have to create a system by which they can be reasonably assured that their average manager out in the company is leading their people really well. I would say leading well means exhibiting behaviors over and over and over that measurably and predictably lead to more engaged employees and better business outcomes. So that's my Theory of the Firm from a leadership perspective. And it makes it really clear that there's this gigantic unconscious risk every company takes on at the lower and mid level of management, because, by the way, there's never been an effective leadership training in the history of the world. You can't train people. When anybody goes to a training, a really small number of people are capable of a really small number of behavior changes based on that training. Just the way it is. I have a model in the book that I call STACK: select, teach, assess, coach. And teach is training, select, teach, assess. But the most important part of that model is assess. Managers getting assessed by their employees on whether they're exhibiting these behaviors. We did it every quarter at Qualtrics. It's how we studied all this. It's how we measured it all. And that's the thing I've seen change behavior and ensure sort of improving management core at a company. If you don't do that, your managers just won't probably get better. If they do, it'll be by accident. I've become really convinced about what I just said over time. I've consulted a lot of companies, thousands actually at this point, spoken, coached, advised. Managers don't get better unless you allow the employees to assess them. Lots of design things to consider there. We could touch on if you want, but for now, just leave it there. So just if I could just come all the way back, is engagement, Look, at Qualtrics, we sold an employee engagement product. And I'm not going to name names, but like one of the really important senior leaders of the company did not believe employee engagement mattered. Not all of them, but one of them, and like an important one. And, it was really hypocritical that we would sell this product, and it was a great product. It made a ton of money, and this guy just wasn't a believer in employee engagement, but it matters. it really strongly correlates with business outcomes. Maybe causal, probably causal, by the way, but really strongly correlates. And so the leadership prescription I put forth, you can't actually, it's very hard to affect engagement. In fact, most engagement enthusiasts, like your dad, who's an IO psychologist, they don't like you to even set it as a target, because there's a, I think it's Goodhart's law, where when you set a measurement, as you set a target at a measurement, ceases to be a good measurement. So they just like engagement to be a measurement. But Amazon has a concept: what's the controllable input metric? You know, I can't control revenue, but what are the things I can control that lead to revenue? Manager effectiveness, measuring how well your managers are leading from the perspective of their employees. That is a controllable input metric. I know it because I have controlled it personally with a team of quants at Qualtrics. I controlled it. We improved it. We knew how to improve it. We knew how to move it. And we saw engagement follow. And then, of course, we did the diligence. We also saw quota attainment follow. We saw contract renewal rate follow. We saw lines of code checked in, JIRA tickets. You name the measurement. 80 to 90% of the measurements we cared about, we could see them directly change after we saw leadership improve measurably.
There's so much to unpack here. I remember one of my favorite sales leaders, sales managers, used to tell me, George, and he was this Southern Georgia accent, or he'd say this in this accent, and he'd say, George, the only thing that you can control is effort and attitude. And I was a door-to-door salesman at the time. And what was interesting was that as I dove into that and I started to really look at my effort and my attitude, and they were very much correlated with my results. 100%. I didn't have any software to figure it out. I just knew it intuitively, and I knew the days that I was in a bad mood or I was upset because I was getting a lot of no's and etc. I just didn't do well. Right. The days where that had a great effort and a great attitude, I did well. And what was interesting was the days after those great days, I did well because I was carrying over that energy, that effort, that attitude, right? That, when we think about the pride, right, in all those kind of details that you talk about in the book, the employee engagement and what that looks like, I'd love to unpack that here in a little bit. That very much impacted my success. Again, very, very clear. And I remember what that sales manager told me. I wanted to kind of switch gears for a quick second, then we can get back to the strategic stuff. But I just think that your time in the Marines, right, was just like incredible. I think just because there's something about that type of experience that I can't think of someone who was in the service that was not, at least in my experience. I can't say that this is a fundamental thing across the board, but like everyone that I know that was in the service was incredibly disciplined. They also understood something that others didn't. Like some of the greatest sales managers and leaders I know, again, were in the service, and there was something around like the camaraderie, like working for each other. My comrade wins, I win, kind of thing, and we win together. And there was an honest kind of element there that was just hard to replicate and BS people in, through some sort of management training. From your experience in the service as a Marine, and thank you, by the way, for your service. What was it? Was there something there that you were able to pull away that really helped you further understand, or maybe laid the foundation for this great insight that you have now?
Yeah, I think probably the quickest answer to your question is there's a very strong cultural idea about always putting your team ahead of yourself, and it's done better there than I've ever seen in any place in sort of corporate America. There's also a very strong culture around ownership, at least in the Marines. I don't know as well the other services, but like without winking, without nudge, like you fully own the organization's failures, and they fully own the wins. Those are a couple really important things. But a little story: when I was interviewing for jobs coming out of Wharton, Google had come to campus for the first time ever. And actually, Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor, she interviewed me in the bowels of Wharton. Really, really funny. Like she, it was really hot in there. She was running a heater because she was sick. She's in a t-shirt. I'm in like a wool sport jacket. I'm sweating so bad. What I learned later was she never wanted to interview me because of the Marine stuff. But she had like literally the only two like libertarians at Google happened to work for her, and they were having a very good experience with an intern. This guy's named Don Fall. He's the CEO of CrossFit now. And they said, Kim, you just got to interview this guy. She didn't want to because she thought they were entrepreneurial, and that meant quick and that meant agile. And she had this notion that and she herself has said, I was a feminist pinko, like anti. So I walk in the room. She's irritated. She had to do the Wharton interview. She's an HBS person. They didn't have Wharton people, so she had to come down from Boston to Philly. She's sick. She didn't want to interview me. She's checking the box because a couple of her directs, one of which was Jared Smith, who founded Qualtrics, can't make this stuff up, made her interview me. And I walk in, and luckily I had enough interview experience so far to learn that every interview, like bad interviewers, the interview is designed to exclude you, period. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you realize kind of what cards you've been dealt in this interview. So I walk in and she says, I don't even think we said our names. And she said, what does a Marine know about being entrepreneurial anyway? And I was like, I had a ton of experience with this. And I said, Kim, do you mind if I take a crack at reframing you? Because it sounds to me like everything you know about military leadership, you learned from watching movies and TV shows that feature boot camp. And super lucky roll of the dice. This is her favorite thing. And I went on to explain, for example, how decision-making is taught and in the Marine Corps. It's very rapid. It's observe, orient, decide, act, and that's a loop. When you decide and act, it changes the system. Now you have to observe, orient, decide, and act. I went on to explain how leading a company, you've got cross-functional partners. You have a set of goals. You have a vision, maybe even. You have a set of goals that you need to achieve, and you have cross-functional partners you have to work with to get that done. I clarified that you don't get to just tell people what to do. It's not at all like that. In fact, it's quite affiliative. There's a time and place for given order people act, but that's boot camp, which is for a very specific purpose, and that's battle. But even the battle planning is highly collaborative. It's not dictatorial. It's not single-threaded. And so I described the leadership environment. It looks very much like a high-quality, fast-moving leadership environment. I ended up getting the job, to her credit, by the way. She allowed herself to be reframed. But I think what you're seeing here is the thing that we did better in the military than I've ever seen. We understood taking care of your people and what that meant. General Lejeune's a famous Marine general. There's a base named after him in North Carolina. Forgive the gendering of this statement. He said it a long time ago. But he said the relationship of officer to enlisted is that of teacher to student, father to son. That is conveying an intimacy. That is conveying a love. That is not conveying a shout at people and they do whatever you say at all, is it? It's something totally different. And we understood that our job was to set our Marines up for success, because if they didn't, they would die. So you just take those two simple ideas, taking care of your Marines, teacher to student, father to son, not manager to employee. If I don't make them successful, they can die. Not if I don't make them successful, they'd miss their quota.
Yeah.
If I don't make them successful, and this is what I certainly carried. It's why I had a good early run at Google when I didn't know what I was doing at all. Anybody who worked with me then knew I didn't know what I was doing. But my teams loved working for me, and we got important stuff done. That second part has to matter, by the way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it that's the military impact that you might have seen or felt.
I hear that, and that really touches me, because when I got into technology, whatever, 2 decades ago, I had no clue. I didn't go to Stanford. I didn't go to, the typical sort of startup engineering, CS background kind of school, right? I was a psychology major that wanted to do IO to follow my dad's footsteps to help people. And actually, even before that, my passion was to help adolescent at-risk youth, which I was one of growing up, to get out of that. And then my dad was like, all right, well, you got to do IO to make a little money. And so there was always this underlining thing of helping people, and maybe it was part of me projecting my own wanting to help myself, wishing that someone would have helped me a little more, even though really thankful to my parents for being those great parents. And but like, I think that's hugely part of the battle. Maybe most of it is caring and wanting authentically to help others. And I think, to your point, that's something that's developed. I also There's a meditation guru kind of influencer out there that talks a lot about the state of being. He's somewhat of a Tony Robbins type of folk, and he said to me, or he said to me, what am I saying? I heard in a podcast of his, he uh, he talked about the state of being, and that when we are in states of being of stress and anxiety and fear and those sort of things, that it's impossible for us to show love and to actually like be in that state of being of love and caring. And as I remember hearing that, and I was just like, boy, that really resonated. I sat on that concept for years, and then it started to really kind of unfold for me. And one of the ways that it unfolded for me was when I started to apply this thinking within the work environment. And particularly, there's been a lot of craziness over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years in SaaS, with layoffs, and right, you've seen all kinds of stuff, and with remote work and those sort of things. And I started to realize, even within myself, when I was freaked out, I wasn't caring about others as much. And I think that leaders and managers, when they're under stress, uh, that's my assumption. I don't have any data to suggest to sort of back that up, right? But that's kind of,
it's biology. So the same idea of you're feeling stressed or threatened in any way. I've actually done this little bit in front of a neuroscientist, and it's what I'm about to say to you is neuroscientist approved. I learned about it first from a book called Your Brain at Work. But when you are in a threat state, your brain is really two major parts. It's lots of things, two major parts in the context of what you're talking about. You've got your hindbrain, or your amygdala, or your limbic system, really, which is sometimes called your lizard brain, which is what meant to convey this is the part we inherited from it through evolution. Then up here, you've got your prefrontal cortex. This is the part that makes us human. It's our problem-solving part of our brain. What people don't necessarily realize is the hindbrain, or the limbic system, is very large, very old, very efficient, meaning it processes glucose and oxygen almost effortlessly. Prefrontal cortex is very new, very small, and actually rather inefficient at processing glucose and oxygen. So anyway, these two parts of the brain, it turns out, not only do they not work together, one interferes with the other. And the reason that's a big problem is, so it's the hindbrain that interferes with the prefrontal cortex. The reason that's important is because the hindbrain is what controls emotion. It's what controls fight or flight those types of things.
like the
Prefrontal
amygdala.
cortex, yeah, all that. The hindbrain is the limbic system is the amygdala plus the cerebellum. But and then your prefrontal is your thinking part, reason, logic, all those things. And evolutionarily, it was important that when like a big bear walked upon you, that you didn't stand there to consider it, but you got the hell out of there. The people who got the hell out of there, where their hindbrain took over and made sure they didn't stand there curious, those people survived, had offspring. The ones who stood there curious, probably on the verge of being geniuses, but they got eaten by the bear. And so their line didn't persist. So what happens is the hindbrain, not only do they not operate together, the hindbrain will actually actively chemically interfere with your prefrontal cortex. I don't know how that contributes to love and caring in the workplace. I do know it means that when your job is to think, it is impossible for you to do your best work if you are feeling in any way freaked out or in a threat state. So it's a close cousin to what you're talking about. Not exactly the same, but it's close cousin. By the way, the transition, you said something really smart about caring about others as sort of the key ingredient for being. It's arguably one of the hardest mindset transitions, going from individual contributor to manager. Individual contributor, no one would ever say this, but the truth of the matter is, by being a little bit selfish, you're probably going to be a little better individual contributor. You have to get your quota. Like, you're going to be a good teammate. But you get, like, your focus needs to be on your work and what you're doing, and that usually means success as an individual contributor. When you become a manager, it's the exact opposite. This is the title of the book, When They Win, You Win. Now your entire mindset needs to be about making others successful. And then you have to trust that if you do that well, then you'll be successful. I mean, we all want to be successful. But flipping that mindset from I'm self-interested, I got to get my work done, I got to deliver my stuff, and then I will get my bonus or I will be successful. It's great for being an IC. It's fine. It is the exact wrong mindset when you become a manager. It has to be about everyone else that you manage and some others around you that you have dependencies with.
Why does this happen all the time where you see the rock star IC gets promoted to manager and like, and then they're not great, right? And then you see people leaving the team and all that, and you just see it over and over and over again. And then you'll sit in the leadership meeting with everyone else going, what the heck's going on? And then it's just like, we get to this takeaway again. And I just see it over and over and over and over again. It's like, why don't we learn?
Yeah, well, because, so remember I mentioned this model called STACK, select, teach, assess, coach. You select once, you teach once, then you assess, coach, assess, coach, assess, coach. Just keep going. You'll always have something to work on as a manager, and your team will tell you what it is if you measure it and give them confidentiality and all those things. Selection is for starters. So we are addicted to taking the best individual contributor and unconsciously just making them the manager. So you got 5 people. You got Susie, who hit her quota, for 12 straight quarters. In fact, overachieved by 10%. You got Janet, who hasn't hit her quota in 3 quarters. Every 100% of the time, the sales team takes Susie, who 12 quarters straight, makes her the manager. This is a coin flip. They think because Susie's ambitious or reliable or conscientious or can sell, they think that somehow that magically translates. The activities that make you successful as an individual contributor look nothing like the activities that make you successful as a manager. Nothing like. I don't mean a little like. I mean nothing. The activities. There might be attributes that carry over, like hustle, but the activities are wildly different. So this great salesperson, this in no way assures you that this person will be a great match. She might be. Susie might be, but she's just as likely not to be. And the problem is we select her for her prowess as an individual contributor, and we don't do any sort of assessment about her potential leadership chops. I don't care if it's instincts or experience, you got to assess that. And ideally with a rubric. Like I literally wrote a rubric in quota. It's on my website, whentheywin.com/tools. You can just have it for free. I don't charge for it. To get clarity on probing people for leadership stuff. Then the second thing everybody does wrong is they think they can train them. Most training sucks. What's it based on? It's flavor of the month bullshit because the CEO decided he wants some situational leadership because he saw some cool video about it. So you just keep adding shit thinking that'll make your managers better, but it's just recreating the same problem I led off the podcast with. People don't know what to focus on. And then, so training sucks. By the way, really small number of people capable, really small number of behavior changes, even if the training were good, which it never is. And we don't assess them because we don't have the guts to let employees evaluate their managers. Question I got asked recently is, how do you keep the inmates from running the asylum? I have an answer for that, but there's a way to design this well so that you don't have that happen. But that's the trick. And I've only seen managers systematically at scale improve when we gave the employees a voice in how well they were doing. In fact, our managers got measurably better. We added 500 managers while I was at Qualtrics, and they got better by 10 points on manager effectiveness score. If we kept the same 100 or so managers when I first joined, and their manager effectiveness went up 10 points, that would have been a miracle. But we added 500, and our manager effectiveness score went up by 10 points. That is unheard of. And it's not because my genius, it's because we assessed our managers from the perspective of their employees. And by the way, then our engagement was the highest I'd seen in tech. We cleared every business hurdle we needed to do a successful IPO and hit for several straight quarters. Our employees delivered those results, and their managers created circumstances under which they could do their best work. So anyway, that's what goes wrong. We don't select consciously for leadership disposition. Teach them. Our training sucks. Select, teach, training sucks. Then we don't assess, coach. We don't do anything in that model of stack well, ever. And so, of course, our managers always suck. Of course, they relentlessly suck. given that.
In When They Win, You Win, you talk a lot about these three leadership elements, right? And I'll go through at a high level: direction, coaching, and career, right? And so at a high level, providing the proper direction, right? When I hear this, when you articulate it in the book, I'm like, oh man, okay, there's sort of these like strategic nuances that you provide to really kind of like unpack it and embrace it in a little easier way. And um but at a high level, it's like, okay, I'm supposed to give the right direction, right? Whether it's clear or not is a different story. Whether I'm doing it effectively or not is a different story. But I think we know that as managers, right? Coaching, right? This idea of coaching and doing that right. I think in my experience, I've rarely ever been coached properly or even coached at all, right? And then the last piece is that career. And this is where I think, at least in my experience as an IC, a manager, I can't think of a manager, unfortunately, right now that I felt authentically cared that I was on a path and even like took the time to dig in to understand what my career path was, right? And so when you think about, direction, coaching, and career, again, at a high level, like seems obvious, but is just constantly not there or missing the mark. And you also talk about how these drive employee engagement. Maybe
And
you can,
business outcomes. Yeah.
yeah, and those business outcomes. Maybe could you unpack that a little bit? Like,
Yeah.
first of all, how do you define employee engagement at a high level for leaders out there?
Well, let me come back to that. I don't define it. It's a very well wrought measurement out of IO psychology, but that's super important. It is not what I think it is or what you think it is or what someone, it's not that someone like leans in and acts interested in a meeting. That's not engagement at all. There's these carefully derived measurements over 30 years of IO psychology. But first of all, the framework, direction, coaching, career, it is not that complicated. In fact, I say the book is simple, and that's a feature, not a bug. Doing these things apparently is, for some reason, impossible because nobody does it. Direction, there's a 4-part direction framework, but here's the insight there. Managers do 2 things wrong with respect to direction setting with their team all the time. Number one is managers are incorrectly believe they have been clear about what is expected. And they are wrong 9 times out of 10. If they were to truly have a way to go anonymously ask their team exactly what's expected each quarter or each week or each day, their teams would have a different answer than the manager's thinking. So that's a huge problem because the manager believes they're doing that well, but they aren't. And the second is the direction that you give your team should be developed collaboratively with them. Your team's closest to the facts, close to the customer, close to the code, close to the financial model, close to the ticket, close to the marketing copy. And then you have to align with the company's goals. And so that's got to be negotiated, but it doesn't come from on high. It needs to be negotiated collaboratively with your employees. This is what the company's trying to get done. Here's how we directly contribute. Here's what we need to get done. 2 big mistakes managers make on direction. Coaching. I talk about really 3 kinds of coaching. I talk about continue coaching, which should be done at a rate of 5-to-1 over improvement coaching, the hard conversation. Most people think praise or continue coaching is something to be withheld. They think it's an ego stroke. They think it's something that only Gen Z needs, or I don't know what the hell goes through people's minds, but it's actually really important mechanism to make explicit what people are doing well, and actually forces you as a leader to get clear on your team standards and to reinforce them over and over and over. A lot of managers are not clear on what their team standards are, for example, behavior. And then career, yeah. Most people let themselves get painted into a corner. Hey, boss, I want to talk about my career. You go in the room, they're like, I didn't get promoted. What's up? That's not career at all. Promotions are cool. There's something cool to tell your family, a little more money, maybe a little more scope. But in the fullness of time, they don't matter at all to your career. What matters is understanding somebody's sort of dream job, where they want to be when they're all done or at the end of their career. And then can we invest in small ways right now to help them get there? They're humans. They're not employees. Gravity Assist. You've seen a space movie before. The mission's in jeopardy. and they don't have enough fuel. They got to go back out and get the guy on Mars because he's, and so they do a gravity assist slingshot maneuver. And that's your job, is you are the gravity assist that slingshots your people out into their careers. Why? Because they're humans. If I had treated you like some employee at Twitter, not like a human being, are you going to have me on this podcast? This is a little win-win moment for us, isn't it? Because we care about human beings. I care that your podcast is a success. You care that my book gets a little extra visibility. You want good content for your listeners because you care about them. Like, this is because you and I think about each other as humans, not as some set of transactions, contractual relationship back in the day. So that's the framework. And when you break those down, direction, coaching, career, easy to remember, break those down into 12 or so really useful, meaningful, tangible behaviors. It's those 12 behaviors that, when practiced regularly and felt by your employees, that's why you assess from the seat of the employee. That's when employee engagement changes. Employee engagement is a 30-year-old IO psychological measurement. It's not what you think it is. It's not what I think it is. It's not what you feel like you observe. You have to survey it on a 5-point scale. It's things like pride in employer. It's things like discretionary effort. It's things like employee net promoter score, like willing to recommend. It's things like employee satisfaction. It gets measured a couple different ways using those ideas because a number of those questions are highly collinear with each other. And so you can start to get at engagement with fewer questions because of the collinearity but conceptually, it's a really important measurement, and it does very strongly predict results. Very strongly predicts results. So more engaged companies have better earnings per share, period. Like, you don't think a publicly held company cares about earnings per share? Bunch of reasons for that. Could be some bidirectional, more successful company means more engaged employees. That's fine. But to pretend like it's to be just like, oh, I'm skeptical that it affects results is also just putting your head in the sand. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I keep thinking about this care just because I know, maybe I'm a little biased because I know you care so much and I've seen you. You didn't have to write a book or become a guru in this topic for me to know that, right? And so I just have to say that is in there. But if you had to think about how to help managers care with their heart, like authentically, not just take a, HR class and read the book and go, okay, that's going to be a good strategy, so let me do that. Because I think that's, as an IC also, or as a manager being managed by maybe a more senior manager, we've all been in those meetings where you're sitting there and you're going, you're just regurgitating some strategic thing, right? Like, I don't feel that you care, right? Like, you might have read the book really well. So I guess what I'm struggling with is how do you bridge the gap between being a strategically sound, I say that in quotations, manager, and then caring, which maybe I've been a bit of a rebel in my life and all that, and I'm sort of counterculture, whatever you want to call it at certain times, although I'm in my older age, maybe getting a little more like my dad. But anyways, I love you, Dad, if you're ever watching this. But how do you actually merge that, right? Where, again, I got to be strategically sound and follow the company stuff, but also care, and maybe sometimes that means breaking the rules and doing something in an effort to use the heart.
Yeah. How do you care? So let me first cover off. I've got a I told you about this problem of complexity for managers, right? The food fight thing. It's complexity. Well, if you're going to be that guy who says that, basically tell the whole leadership content industry that they're not doing their jobs well enough. If you're going to be the guy who talks about complexity, you also need to be a guy who simplifies. So I asked myself, what is the simplest version of a job description for every manager? And I don't know what being strategic means. But I will tell you, there's two things every manager needs to do over and over and over. Deliver an aligned result. There's no job if you don't do that. And then second is enable the success of the people on your team. Short-term success, like doing a good job now, and long-term success, engaging in their careers. That maps perfectly over direction, coaching, career, by the way. Deliver an aligned result, that's direction. Coaching is enabling short-term success. Career is enabling long-term success. So it is in your job to deliver an aligned result. I think this is what you mean by being strategically sound manager, whatever. And that means becoming aware and getting your questions answered about what the company's trying to get done and getting really crystal clear about how your team fits into what the company's trying to get done. If you work at a company where they don't have company objectives or they don't have a clear purpose, or they don't have a clear vision, the things I laid out in the framework in the book, and this will be very difficult. So that's important. But enable the success of the people on your team. I thought about this a lot, and there's a lot of ways you can care about people. It turns out, though, that some of the things that, for example, I like to do, like I like to know what's going on in people's personal lives. There's a very large number of people who do not want that from their manager. They do not feel cared for with me asking about soccer weekend or me inquiring about their health. They feel threatened. So then it's like, oh, shoot, if you can't rely on that, what can you rely on? Well, it turns out it's actually fairly simple. People just want to do great work and be totally psyched while doing it. The only thing everyone has in common at work is they want to be successful. Let's say they can be, but they want to be successful. Not everybody wants to make friends. Not everybody wants to go to your stupid happy hour. Not everybody wants to go to your stupid, bumper cars offsite. We all have to pretend like we love those. A lot of people hate them. But you can never say that. But everybody wants to be successful. Not everybody wants to date. People date at work. I can't believe this, by the way. You shouldn't do that. But people date at work. Not everybody wants that. I had a woman say this. It was beautiful. I was doing an investigation when I was Qualtrics. She was one of our account executives up in Canada. And she said, look, man, I just want to get in here. I want to do my work. I want to go home. She was an awesome account executive, I never had anybody crystallize it for me like that. So anyway, when you realize the only thing everyone has in common at work is they want to be successful, the universal care personally playbook at work is to help people be successful, deliver an aligned result, enable the success of the people on your team. Each human being, you invest in them with proper, clear expectation setting direction, proper coaching to help them be successful in their job. And that's your job. If you're not doing that with your 5 to 7 direct reports, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your time? Whatever it is, it's bullshit. Then the career side is a way to convey, because this is about deconstructing the fact that this is an employee-boss relationship. This is now getting to know what someone wants to be well beyond these 4 walls and making small investments in them today to help them take small, tangible steps toward that long-term vision they have for themselves. That's really different. That immediately changes the relationship from boss employee to human. And I have an obligation to help enable your long-term success. A lot of people think when you do this kind of work, help people think about where they want to be next, help people think about where they're going to be in long. They think you lose people. You shouldn't do it to retain people, but it turns out it's rather retentive because people are like, oh, my boss invests in me in a unique way. I'm gonna hang here. So that's kind of how I think you care. Like if I had to give you a little playbook for how to do it, if you can't, listen, people have challenged me. Like, I want to care about you right now, but you are driving me freaking bananas. And I'm mad at you and I'm upset with you. And we just had this conversation last week and you're coming in here now to our one-on-one acting like we didn't have it. Like my direct reports, and they're on my nerves, and they're making it harder for me to care about them. But I can never lose sight of my obligation to help them be successful. And if I just keep doing that over and over and over with each individual, each human being, I promise you over time, they will feel cared for at work. When you make it clear, my entire being is to be here to make you success. When you win, it's only when you win that I have any prayer of winning. People feel that. And that's how reputations are built. And that's how success is won.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a quick example. There's been, as you know, in SaaS and tech in general, and maybe other industries, a lot of layoffs, right? We went through this wild thing that I think we're still experiencing, but maybe has been a little more normalized. And because I think of the nature of some compliance, and this is just my assumption because I've been trying to do a little research on this. I haven't been able to nail it yet, but because a lot of our work environments over the last 2 or 3 years, et cetera, have been remote work, and there's like compliance, SOC 2, and all kinds of stuff. There was a way that people have been largely getting laid off, and I'll get to my point here in a second. Just wanted to kind of frame it here. And the way that they've been largely getting laid off is rather abruptly, right? They're going in the morning to check their email or Slack or whatever, and they're shut out. And then they check their personal email, and there's an email in there that says, "Hey, you've been part of a RIF. Sorry," right? And I know a lot of people have been experiencing that, and I know a lot of people will sit back and go, God, that was so soulless. There was no, like, my manager. I believed that my manager was going to be there for me. I believed there was an authentic relationship, but that's how I got shot in the head. Right? Sorry to use that, but that's terminology, right? That's been out there. And when I think about being a manager, I would have luckily I have not been in that situation, right? And I know that there's a lot of great people out there that have been in that situation. Russ, I couldn't do it, man. I just could not do it. I like to be able to do that to people that I authentically developed relationships with. So that's what I was referring to, right? When it's like, I have to be strategic. I have to do my job as a manager, and maybe there's some compliance thing, or like I was told to let people go this way, but at the same time, that doesn't feel right. And I don't feel like I'm actually really doing these humans that roll up to me justice, or it's not in their best interest. So those are the difficult moments that I was sort of referring to.
Yeah. Well, layoff is a really unique and difficult moment in time. The abruptness of a layoff, I would argue, is actually the abruptness of the news, not the mechanism by which it's slipped, but the abruptness of the news, I would argue, is actually, that's probably a well executed layoff. I think a lot of times the big trade off a layoff planner has to make for months usually is to who to talk to, because the danger and of rumors is really, really high, and it's not humane. Imagine for just a second, pretend there's a company thinking about doing a layoff in 6 months. They start with 25%. They open the tent up, talk to a lot of people. That rumor gets out because people can never keep their freaking mouth shut. And then they land on 6%. They will have put a lot of people through a lot of unnecessary. So I think shrinking the tent when planning, I taught a class so I worked at a venture firm, and I recorded a class on how to do layoffs humanely and safely. So I've been through this in a lot of detail. So I think layoff planners are doing a better job when the news is a surprise. I hate it, but it's just that's actually better than rumors and speculation for months. That stuff's those are unavoidable, but the small, as much as you can minimize those things. So now the question is, how do we give this news? I did a talk for Google, and I didn't realize they were pretty fresh off a layoff, and it was actually about leading through uncertainty, and I use layoffs as an example. And boy, I touched a nerve, and you could feel it. And what I talked about some behaviors managers had engaged in that I called wrong. I didn't know I didn't know this happened, but basically the manager's throwing the company under the bus. I don't know why we're doing this. And so I think since a lot of managers don't have a say in planning the layoff, I think some companies want a mechanism to not force the manager to communicate the news. It's a nice idea. It's the wrong idea. What you have to do is you have to give your managers a chance 24 hours in advance, basically, to get what they need to be able to own the layoff event. Hardest thing you ever ask any manager to do, but you have to pass on the most unpopular decisions of the company as if they're your own, even if you don't have a chance to affect those decisions. That's the job. Sorry, I know people hate that, and people think what most people really want to do is sit with their employees and commiserate, and throw the company under the. I don't know why we're doing it. Yes, you do. The company misforecast its numbers, and now you have too much cost, and your profitability is suffering, and you had to let people go. Everybody knows why you do a layoff. That's it. It's one reason. So don't sit there and pretend like you don't, but go get whatever you need to get to be able to sell the decision. That is your job, frontline manager or not. Anyway, most managers can't do this. Most companies don't even know how to expect it. So what they do instead is they alleviate that responsibility from the manager for good reasons and bad reasons. They send an email because that they can control that message. Then what happens is people feel bad about this. Look, here's the reality. I don't care if you brought in who's like the sweetest, kindest person, like in the media or in actor or musician, like that, like
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves. Oh man, good get.
Yeah, right.
I don't care if you brought in Keanu Reeves to be the guy to give your news to everybody. Nobody's gonna like that they got fired. So I think getting really wrapped around that actual mechanism, yeah, that's cold, man. That email's cold. You can't defend it. I think that companies are in this really difficult spot where they haven't taught managers what their job is, which is to own this terrible news, sell it actually. And they realize they put managers in a difficult spot because managers can't have a big say in the layoff event. They just can't. It just doesn't make any sense because that's opening the tent too far too soon, causes rumors and speculation, which causes misery in the company.
Yeah.
These are really difficult set of variables to manage, man, that are impossible to manage well. But at the end of the day, nobody's going to be like, man, I don't love that I lost my job, but boy, Keanu, that guy really delivered the news well. And I love this company. Yeah. People are just pissed either way. And so forget it. Now, if you said, look, thanks for the heads up. I need to talk to my team. Can I get, and you ask permission, you get the news out before the email, and you say, listen, an email is going to come in a couple hours. I'm really sorry about that. That's how the company's doing it, but I wanted to talk to you. I think it's a super high quality thing to do.
Yeah.
Realize your obligation is to defend the company decision in that moment, and not create any more risk for the company. You can be a human. You can convey, obviously, your sympathy. You can convey your willingness to help them after they're gone. All those things that are normal and human is fine. But you still have an obligation to defend and sell the company's very difficult. Hardest thing you ask a manager to do.
Super hard, right? And I've had so many discussions with folks over the last several years, even though I know this stuff has been happening in startups and stuff, for forever, right? Since the beginning of time. And I think that to your point, it is very, very hard. I guess I keep digging into think about how these things could be done a little better. I understand like risk goes up when, for example, you had to let a bunch of folks go or an individual or so. And there was this idea of, hey, you have a 2-week notice in the past, right? Like there's been some sort of thing. You were put on a PIP. So it was, there was something going on, right? Where at least you knew that you weren't performing well, right? And so mass layoffs probably the different thing than like individuals who are being laid off based off of their performance or
they're in the eyes of employment law, performance issue is considered employee fault. A layoff is considered company fault. And you get a ton of protections as a company using a layoff. It's an economic problem in the company that you shouldn't mix those actually. Somebody says, oh, our layoff, let's just pick our bottom 10%. That's bad. You should have been performance managing your bottom 10%. If you could positively identify them, that should have already happened. I'm fine with as a final lens, like we can only have 6 accountants, not 7. Okay, so we're choosing accountant and we would prefer someone more senior. Okay, fine. Or we prefer someone less expensive. And then maybe if there's 2 that after you go through all your higher quality criteria, which might be tenure, might be seniority, might be the job. If you got 2 left, maybe use a performance lens then, but you shouldn't mix those 2 things ever. So just it's a super corny technicality, but as someone who's helped a lot of companies, I hated doing it, but plan layoffs. It's a very bad instinct people have to mix performance into the layoff. It's a bad instinct. It's very risky. It can be done, but it creates a lot of extra legal risk. Yeah.
The reason why I asked that particular question is because when you think about gauging employee engagement and understanding it, I know pride was one of the the variables, right, to dig into. And what I've found is that pride is something that could be impacted in a lot of different ways negatively. And for example, layoffs and things like that, I have seen a lot of mismanagement of the effect on the folks who end up not being laid off.
Saying, yeah, they're called survivors. Yeah.
Survive, yeah, right. And they're not
studied.
proud. Like I have very close friends who have been in that situation, and I've been in it before as well. And it's like there's this sort of shame, and because the management mismanaged the aftermath of it,
Yeah.
right? And so that was, I think, why I was asking that question, to also kind of like dive into things that, first of all, why does pride matter? I know there's a lot of variables to choose from, but I wanted to kind of like double click on the pride thing and how different things can impact that, but why it's important to be proud.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a good. You should have your pop on and ask him why pride. By the way, three engagement variables that will change after layoff for the survivors are probably net promoter score. It's hard for me to recommend this company that mismanaged its finances to the extent we had to fire a bunch of employees en masse. Employee satisfaction probably tanks, and then pride and employer probably tanks. Yeah. But so survivors have been studied by Harvard. There is usually a 6-month productivity fall in the whole company after a layoff event. 6 months. In fact, a company I used to work for here in Utah measured it in their engineering group, and it was you can measure with Jira tickets, you can lines of code, and they were incredibly unproductive after a layoff event. The reason I mention that is it's super important to do your best to do it once, even if it means you need to cut a little deeper. In fact, this company did a really weak layoff event thinking they were being humane, and then they had to repeat it 6 months later. And they just keep resetting the time to when productivity can recover. They did one, if they did one in the fall last year, the productivity began to recover finally in spring. Fascinating. So people are just scared. They're in their hindbrain. They're in their threat state, which means definitionally can't do your best work. They are evaluating other options because they don't feel on solid ground. They feel like they could be betrayed or something at any point, let go at any point, since it happened to people around them. And it takes time for that trust and to feel that solidity with the company to sort of reconstitute itself. And so you end up with a double whammy of a lot of complicated ideas around trust and looking elsewhere, matched up with the engagement variables that. But why pride matters, that's something the IO psychologist has to. Why are these things engagement? That's where my capability ends. Yeah. And the actual, I sound like an IO psychologist sometimes, but if you ask me why pride matters, it's instantly clear I'm not one.
Awesome.
But you've touched on a very real dynamic, which is survivor productivity falls, their engagement falls, it's measurably falls. Those three variables tend to be fall big time. Takes time for that to come back, and it usually takes 6 to 7 months, because basically it just takes time for the lack of trust, the fear. It takes time for that stuff to just get processed by human beings.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Russ, I gotta say, there's just so much that you touched on in the book and on this show that I feel like we could talk for hours. But I wanted to go ahead and wrap up with some final thoughts around organizations starting to really, really, really focus on prioritizing creating a simpler and more, what you call, like, coherent leadership standard, right? And that has those quantitative elements to help back the results and make it a priority. Any sort of tips here as we wrap up here for folks out there, for leaders out there, to make it table stakes for their organization?
Well, it's actually really hard. I think so I was, before I left Qualtrics, we hired my replacement, awesome woman from Adobe, and I was advising CHROs for, I don't know, 6-8 months, something like that. I had to train my replacement, and I was advising CHROs, and I got to talk to a leadership group at one of the big 3 automakers in the U.S. And they wanted to do this thing that I mentioned, which is this surveying the employees about whether their managers are showing specific behaviors, right? And which behaviors, you're going to use matters a ton, but that's deep quantitative work that needs to be done and should be done within your culture. I have a bank of like 20 questions. You could probably do as few as 8, do as many as 20, and get a really good picture on your managers. And these guys were really frustrated because they kept getting this idea shut down by senior management. I'm going to tell you the sort of nefarious reason why, and then tell you the less nefarious reason why. If you think about it for a second, you design this thing well, you give people confidentiality. They get to rate their managers on the extent, the frequency with which managers are showing specific behaviors. Not, do I trust but the design is not popularity contest. Do they observe a behavior? And give them confidentiality, meaning they can speak freely without fear of retaliation. Then teach managers the exact wrong idea is retaliation. You need to learn from your team how to lead better. And then you have to use it. We used it. We didn't use it punitively. We used it to help managers get better. We would withhold reward sometimes, but that's not punishing. That's withholding reward. They're not the same. So that's how you culturally get that going. Think about that. Think about that for a second. The very first thing that changed, in fact, maybe even more than the specific behaviors that we were evaluating, the second you give employees a voice in how well their manager's leading, guess what behavior stopped overnight? Skipping your one-on-ones. How many managers skip their one-on-ones because they want to be more visible for their boss's boss, or just some bullshit that is wrong? Your job is to have your one-on-ones with your team more than it is anything else. One of my rubric questions is, what are the kinds of things that would cause you to reschedule your one-on-ones with your team? And the only real acceptable answer is like customer stuff, because that's who we're all here for. I told senior leaders to go pound sand, or if they wanted me to come, I would make my boss tell me why I need to disrupt my entire team's schedule for the week so I could come to their, meeting. That likely, by the way, was a function of them planning poorly, my boss.
Yeah.
Right. But a lot of people are like, oh, my boss wants to meet with me. They cancel all their one-on-ones.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, what was going on at the big 3 motor company was senior people did not want the transparency on their leadership because they were good at managing up and they were able to control and present themselves as one kind of leader, and their teams were having a very different experience. The second you introduce a survey like we introduced, you change the voice. Suddenly their manager has visibility on how well they're leading from the perspective of their employees. And then once we start to develop the data that showed, the better these managers lead, the better our sales team produces, suddenly there was a ton of visibility on that. Now, our managers were good people. They willingly turned the corner, but it is an uncomfortable first year when you introduce something like this. And it turns out you thought you were a good manager and you actually kind of suck. Super common. A lot of VPs, SVPs, directors, they're going to fight this because they don't want visibility on their shitty leadership because they're skipping their one-on-ones for months on end. And this is the jig is up, and now they actually have to show up for their teams and do a good job. That's one reason it gets fought. Second reason is there's not really this belief. Honestly, people speak out of one side of their mouth that managers matter, and then they don't really do anything to make them better. They invest in some bullshit training that doesn't matter because it looks cool, it sounds cool, it's the flavor of the month, it's the new bestseller, whatever. The speaker's funny, like all this nonsense. They don't do select, teach, assess, coach. They don't have a systematic approach to improving their managers over a long period of time. But that's because there's a lack of belief that managers really matter as much as I think they do, or as I say they do. They don't really believe it. And then there's just sort of ignorance about, okay, I do believe it, but I don't really know how to change it. I don't know it's select, teach, assess, and coach, with assess being most important, not teach, assess being most important. So, dude, like, I don't know the answer. I advise some CEOs here and there. I give them a sort of a total people strategy playbook where this is front and center, of course, because the people deliver the results. The managers create the circumstances or destroy them under which people do their best work. And senior leadership needs to create the accountability mechanism, the assurance that their managers are leading well. And half of them are like, oh, it's too fancy. And half are like, it's really cool. We'll get, half of the remainder are like, it's really cool. We'll get to this later. And then half of the remainder are like, we should get this going. How do we get this going? Well, I know how to get it going. You do the survey. I don't care if you got one other thing in place. You start the manager effective score. You start the assessment of stack. It's uncomfortable. Nobody's ready for it. You could do a certain amount of change management, but you just got to get that going and make that a part of your discipline. You got to get that dashboarded. You got to get managers paying attention to it. You got to get people knowing that measurement matters, that you're going to withhold reward, that you're looking at it, that you care about it. That's what changes behavior. And it's fairly cheap and easy to get that installed. It just takes a lot of political, it takes guts from senior leadership to give employees that say. Just to the skeptics on this about, oh, now the inmates are running the asylum. No, they're not. Stop it. It's an excuse and it's horseshit. I'm going to tell you for two reasons. One is you're asking employees whether managers exhibited specific behaviors, in my case, that I've studied that predict engagement and performance. So they're worth paying attention to. Second is you've given employees confidentiality. So they're going to be speaking the truth. But they're not running the asylum at this point because remember, the manager that's being evaluated, that manager's manager and their manager, they have the most evaluative power over that manager, not the employees. So it's just a new signal that doesn't suddenly supersede all the other signals they've been using for years. It's just a new signal, and it's a signal that really matters. And so the idea that inmates are running the asylum is nonsense. The inmates, in your really uncharitable, untrusting metaphor, the inmates now just have a little voice in how the asylums run that you need to pay attention to. Like, it's their team too. And by the way, their manager probably sucks, whether you know it or not. Their manager probably sucks, and you probably suck as a manager, even though you don't think you do. So that's kind of what I say to that. But there's a lot of sand in the gears on getting something like this going because it's very difficult on incumbent leaders who aren't doing their jobs.
Yeah. Awesome.
Sad state of affairs. Anybody wants to know why managers suck? I just literally told you. Because we don't give employees a chance to say exactly how they suck. We haven't studied the behaviors that matter and give employees a chance to say, my manager does show those behaviors, my manager doesn't show those behaviors. And then give managers a chance to improve with the behaviors that actually, not all the bullshit nonsense out in the world. A very tightly wound, it's not a basketball, it's the core around a golf ball. Very tightly wound set of behaviors that matter. Engaged employees, better business outcomes, rinse, repeat, doesn't need to be fancy. Just do that. You'll be fine.
Awesome. Russ Laraway, thank you so much. You're a legend in the Valley. For everyone out there, go ahead and pick up When They Win, You Win. You can pick it up on Amazon very easily. That's where I got it. Any other URLs or links that folks should go to pick up the book, but also learn more about what you've been teaching out there?
No, Amazon's the best place. I think on my website, When They Win, You Win, I think I have some other places, discount places. But at this point, Amazon's the best place to get the book. Thanks for asking. But whentheywinyouvin.com. Old CEO of Twitter, Dick Costolo, told me I need to get a link shortener on that. I don't know, man. Once you type it in once, you don't never have to type it again. Whentheywinyouvin.com. And then I'm super easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm still easy to find. I actually still use Twitter, RAL1. I still love it. I don't care who bought it. I don't care what its new name is. I'll never call it the new name.
Yeah, me neither.
I love community notes. It is rapidly becoming a really important, balanced social media platform because of community notes, by the way. People are sleeping on Twitter. They shouldn't. But I'm there, LinkedIn, and whentheywinyouvin.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Russ, and have a wonderful day.
You too, buddy. Talk to you soon.